The Viking Age, the rise and fall of the Norse warriors. Part 1, the Frozen North. More than 1,000 years ago, in the frozen north of Europe, there was a land where survival was never guaranteed. Its people called it home. Today, we know it as Scandinavia. Towering mountains stretched toward the sky, dark forests covered the valleys, frozen rivers carved their way through the land, and beyond the rocky coastline, the cold northern sea never rested. Winter ruled this world for most of the year. Snow buried entire villages beneath thick blankets of ice. The wind howled through wooden homes. Food became scarce. Every sunrise meant another battle against nature itself. One cold evening, a young boy stood beside his father at the edge of the sea. He looked across the endless water and quietly asked, "Father, what lies beyond the horizon?" His father remained silent for a moment. Then he smiled. "No one knows," he whispered. "But someday, one of us will find out." The boy stared into the distance, not with fear, but with curiosity. That curiosity lived inside many young people across Scandinavia. While the rest of Europe built castles and kingdoms, these northern families learned something even more valuable: how to survive. They hunted through frozen forests, caught fish beneath thick sheets of ice, built their own homes, repaired their own boats, and faced every winter knowing it could be their last. Year after year, the frozen north shaped them into something extraordinary. They became stronger, braver, and tougher than anyone beyond the sea could ever imagine. No king knew their names, no kingdom feared them, but hidden within these quiet villages, a generation was growing up that would soon change the history of the world forever.
The years passed. The young boy became a young man. Like every son of Scandinavia, he had learned to hunt, to fish, and to survive. But something inside him refused to stay still. Every evening, he climbed the same rocky cliff overlooking the sea. Beyond the endless waves, he imagined lands no one in his village had ever seen. His father often noticed him staring toward the horizon. One evening, he walked beside his son and quietly asked, "What are you looking for?" The young man answered without taking his eyes off the sea, "A future that isn't here." His father nodded. He understood. Scandinavia was changing. Each year, more children were born, but the land never grew larger. The forests could only provide so much. The fields could only feed so many families. Many young men realized that if they wanted a better life, they would have to leave home. Fortunately, the people of the North possessed a gift unlike any other. They were master shipbuilders. From mighty oak trees, they crafted long, elegant ships that were both strong and incredibly fast. These vessels could survive violent storms across the open sea, yet sail through rivers so shallow that no enemy expected them. For the first time, the sea no longer looked like the end of the world. It became a road leading toward adventure, toward wealth, toward glory. As more ships gathered along the shoreline, the people of Scandinavia prepared for something that had never been attempted before. They were ready to leave their frozen homeland and sail into the unknown. None of them could imagine that their first great voyage would soon change the history of Europe forever.
Part 2,
The first voyage. Spring finally arrived. The snow began to melt. The frozen rivers flowed again toward the sea. Across the villages of Scandinavia, a different kind of excitement filled the air. This was not the season for survival. It was the season for sailing. On the shoreline, skilled craftsmen gave their final touches to the great longships. Their dragon-headed prows faced the open sea as if they were already searching for distant horizons. Families gathered to say goodbye. Mothers embraced their sons. Wives held their husbands tightly. Children watched in silence, knowing they might not see them again for many years. Before anyone stepped aboard, the old village elder raised his hands toward the sky. He offered a prayer to Odin for wisdom, to Thor for strength, and to Njord, the god of the sea, for calm waters and a safe journey. The warriors stood silently. Each carried an axe at his side, a round shield on his back, and hope deep within his heart. For some, this voyage was about finding wealth. For others, it was about discovering new lands. And for many, it was their chance to earn a name that would never be forgotten. As the wind filled the sails, the ship slowly drifted away from the shore. The villagers watched until the dragon-headed vessels became tiny shadows on the endless sea. No one knew where these men would end up, but everyone understood one thing. The people leaving that morning would never return as the same men who had departed. A new chapter in history had begun.
For days, the Viking ships sailed across the cold waters of the North Sea. The wind pushed their sails forward, while the sound of crashing waves echoed beneath their wooden hulls. Then, one quiet morning, land appeared on the horizon. It was the coast of England. Far from the busy towns and mighty castles, a small island rested peacefully beside the sea. On that island stood Lindisfarne Monastery. For decades, monks had lived there in peace. Their days were filled with prayer, reading, and copying sacred books by hand. No walls protected them. No soldiers stood guard. No one imagined that danger could come from the sea. As the first rays of sunlight touched the monastery, the monks heard an unfamiliar sound, the steady rhythm of wooden oars. They looked toward the shore and saw strange ships unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Dragon-headed vessels, warriors dressed in wool and leather, round shields hanging along the sides of their ships, axes glimmering beneath the morning sun. Within moments, the silence was shattered. The Vikings stormed onto the island with incredible speed. Doors were broken open. Treasures made of gold and silver were seized. Sacred relics disappeared into Viking hands. The frightened monks had nowhere to run. For Europe, the attack on Lindisfarne was more than a simple raid. It was a warning. A new force had arrived from the frozen north, a force that would return again and again for generations to come. On that day, the name Viking began to spread across Europe, not as traders, not as explorers, but as the warriors everyone feared.
Part 3. The Longships that changed history. News of the attack on Lindisfarne spread rapidly across Europe. Kings strengthened their defenses. Monasteries hid their treasures. Villages built watchtowers along the coast. Everyone asked the same question: who are these warriors? But while Europe feared the Vikings, very few understood the true secret behind their success. It wasn't only their courage, it wasn't only their weapons, it was their ships. The legendary Viking Longships were unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. Long, narrow, fast, and incredibly flexible. Built from strong oak trees, each plank was carefully fitted together with remarkable precision. Every ship was designed to survive the violent waves of the North Sea, while remaining light enough to travel through shallow rivers. This gave the Vikings an advantage no other army possessed. They could sail across the open ocean, then quietly move inland through narrow rivers, reaching towns and villages that believed they were completely safe. Many attacks happened before the enemy even realized the Vikings had arrived. Their dragon-headed prows became symbols of fear. Some believed the carved dragons frightened evil spirits. Others believed they terrified anyone who saw them approaching through the morning mist. Whether those stories were true or not, one thing was certain. Whenever a Viking longship appeared on the horizon, panic soon followed. For the Vikings, the sea was never an obstacle. It was their greatest weapon.
The Vikings were far more than fearless raiders. Once their longships proved they could conquer the sea, the horizon was no longer a limit. It became an invitation. Every voyage carried them farther from home than the one before. Some ships sailed west, crossing the stormy North Atlantic until they reached the remote islands of the Faroe Islands and Iceland. Others continued even farther, settling the icy coast of Greenland under the leadership of the famous explorer Eric the Red. For most people in medieval Europe, these journeys seemed impossible, but to the Vikings, they were simply the next adventure. Then, around the year 1000 AD, a young Norse explorer named Leif Erikson decided to sail even farther west than anyone before him. His crew crossed the vast Atlantic Ocean, facing towering waves, violent storms, and endless days surrounded by nothing but water. Finally, land appeared on the horizon. It was a place covered with forests, rivers, and rich grasslands. The Vikings called it Vinland. Today, historians believe this land was part of modern-day Newfoundland, Canada. Nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus reached the Americas, the Vikings had already set foot on the continent. Although their settlement did not last, their voyage proved something extraordinary. The Vikings were not only warriors, they were among history's greatest explorers. Their courage pushed them beyond the edge of the known world, discovering lands that no European had ever recorded before. With every new voyage, the legend of the Vikings grew stronger, and soon, powerful kings across Europe realized these northern sailors were becoming far more than raiders. They were becoming a force capable of building kingdoms of their own.
Part 4. The Great Viking Leaders. As the Viking world continued to grow, so did the legends of its greatest warriors. Across Scandinavia, stories were told around glowing fires about men whose courage seemed beyond human. One name echoed louder than all the others: Ragnar Lothbrok. No one knows exactly where history ends and legend begins. Some believe Ragnar was a real Viking king. Others believe he was a hero created from the stories of many great warriors. But one thing is certain: his name became a symbol of fear throughout Europe. According to the Old Norse sagas, Ragnar led daring raids across England and France. His victories brought imaginable wealth back to Scandinavia. Gold, silver, weapons, and priceless treasures filled his ships. But Ragnar wanted more than riches. He wanted glory. He believed a true warrior should never fear death. Eventually, his ambition led him into one final campaign against the Kingdom of Northumbria in England. This time, luck abandoned him. His army was defeated. Ragnar was captured alive by King Ela. Instead of a warrior's death on the battlefield, he was thrown into a pit filled with deadly snakes. As the venom slowly spread through his body, the old stories say Ragnar smiled. He looked toward the sky and declared, "The piglets would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffered." He wasn't speaking about himself. He was speaking about his sons. And those words would soon change history forever. The news of Ragnar Lothbrok's death spread across Scandinavia like a raging wildfire. In every Viking hall, warriors fell silent. His sons refused to believe that the greatest Viking of their age had died as a prisoner. Grief quickly turned into rage. Among them were some of the most feared names in Viking history: Bjorn Ironside, Oba, Hvitserk, and the most mysterious of them all, Ivar the Boneless. No one knows exactly why he was called the Boneless. Some historians believe he suffered from a rare disease. Others believe it was simply a nickname given to describe his incredible agility and brilliant mind. Whatever the truth, one thing was undeniable. Ivar was a military genius. He knew that revenge required more than courage. It required patience, strategy, and overwhelming force. In 865 AD, the Sons of Ragnar gathered one of the largest Viking armies ever seen. History remembers it as the Great Heathen Army. Hundreds of longships crossed the North Sea. Thousands of Viking warriors landed on the shores of England. This was no ordinary raid. They had not come for silver. They had not come for land. They had come for one reason: revenge. Kingdom after kingdom fell before them. Cities were captured. Armies were crushed. And finally, King Ela, the man responsible for Ragnar's death, was captured alive. According to the Old Norse sagas, his execution became one of the most terrifying legends in Viking history, the infamous Blood Eagle. Whether the story is completely true or partly legend, no one can say for certain. But after that campaign, the name of Ragnar Lothbrok's family became feared across Europe. The Vikings were no longer seen as scattered raiders. They had become conquerors, capable of changing the fate of entire kingdoms.
Part 5. The beginning of the end. For nearly 3 centuries, the Vikings ruled the seas. Their ships reached England, France, Ireland, even the distant shores of North America. To many, they seemed unstoppable. But while the Vikings were conquering foreign lands, something unexpected was happening back home. Scandinavia itself was beginning to change. Small Viking kingdoms slowly united under powerful rulers. Instead of fighting one another, many leaders wanted peace, stability, and stronger governments. At the same time, a new faith began spreading across the north. Christian missionaries arrived from England and mainland Europe.
At first, many Vikings rejected their message. They still honored Odin, Thor, and the ancient Norse gods. But year after year, more kings accepted Christianity. As rulers converted, so did their people. The old temples slowly disappeared. Wooden churches rose in their place. The traditions that had guided Viking life for generations began to fade. The fierce warriors who once dreamed of reaching Valhalla now lived in a very different world. The Viking Age was changing, not because they had become weak, but because their society was becoming something entirely new. Yet one final warrior refused to accept that change. He believed the old Viking spirit could still conquer kingdoms. His name was Harald Hardrada, and he was preparing for one last invasion that would decide the fate of the Viking Age forever. In the autumn of 1066, Harald Hardrada gathered one final fleet. More than 300 Viking longships cut through the cold waters of the North Sea. The old warrior stood at the front of his ship. His silver beard danced in the wind. He had spent his entire life fighting. He had battled across Eastern Europe, served as a commander in the mighty Byzantine Empire, and earned a reputation as one of the greatest warriors of his age. Now, he believed destiny had one final victory waiting for him. His target was England. At first, everything went according to plan. Harald's army landed on the English coast and defeated local forces at the Battle of Fulford. The victory filled the Vikings with confidence. Many believed England would once again fall beneath Viking rule. But only a few days later, everything changed. King Harald Godwinson marched his exhausted English army nearly 200 miles in just 4 days. Before the Vikings could prepare, the English attacked without warning near a place called Stamford Bridge. The battle was fierce. Axes clashed against swords. Arrows darkened the sky. The river ran red with blood. In the middle of the fighting, an English arrow struck Harald Hardrada in the throat. The great Viking king collapsed to the ground. His warriors fought desperately to protect him, but the battle was already lost. The Viking army retreated. Of the hundreds of ships that had carried them to England, only a small fraction returned home. Historians would later remember this moment as the symbolic end of the Viking Age. The era of fearless Norse conquerors had finally come to an end.
Part 6. The Viking Legacy. Although the Viking Age had come to an end, the Vikings themselves did not disappear. The warriors who once terrified Europe slowly became farmers, merchants, builders, and kings. Across England, Ireland, France, and Eastern Europe, many Viking settlers chose to remain. Instead of returning to Scandinavia, they built homes, raised families, and became part of the very societies they had once attacked. In northern France, a Viking leader named Rollo accepted land from the French king in exchange for protecting the coastline from future raids. That region became known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. Nearly 2 centuries later, the descendants of those same Vikings would once again change history. In 1066, William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy and a descendant of Rollo, invaded England and won the Battle of Hastings. His victory forever transformed the English language, culture, and monarchy. The Viking influence stretched even farther. Many English words we still use today, such as sky, window, knife, husband, and law, came from the Old Norse language. Even after the Viking ships disappeared from the seas, their culture continued to shape Europe in ways few people realize. The age of Viking raids had ended, but the Viking Legacy was only beginning.
More than 1,000 years have passed since the last Viking longship sailed into history. Their kingdoms disappeared, their battles came to an end, and the age of Viking conquest faded into legend. Yet somehow, the Vikings never truly vanished. Today, archaeologists continue to uncover their ships buried beneath the earth, their weapons preserved in ancient graves, and their rune stones standing silently across Scandinavia. Each discovery reveals a little more about the people who once changed the course of history. Their stories have inspired countless books, films, television series, and video games. Names like Ragnar Lothbrok, Leif Erikson, Eric the Red, and Harald Hardrada are still remembered around the world. But perhaps the Vikings' greatest achievement was never the treasures they stole or the kingdoms they conquered. It was their courage to sail into the unknown. They crossed dangerous oceans without modern maps. They explored lands no European had ever recorded. They refused to let fear define the limits of their world. Their greatest weapon was not the axe, nor the sword. It was their determination to keep moving forward, no matter what stood before them. From the frozen shores of Scandinavia to the distant coast of North America, the Vikings left footprints across continents and a legacy that has survived for more than 1,000 years. History remembers them as warriors. The world remembers them as legends. And even today, whenever a dragon-headed ship appears in a story, or the name Viking is spoken, the echoes of the North still live on.
Thank you for watching Fact Vault. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next documentary. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, because here at Fact Vault, history never truly sleeps.